Going to close out The Great Wheel by Robert Lawson. We're going to read both chapters 15 and 16 here at the end. 2 days passed, and about sunset of the third day she came. At first glance, Con mistook her for one of the waitresses from the German village or Old Vienna, for she was wearing the same quaint, old-world costume that she had worn on the city of Bristol. Her pale hair was again arranged in its crown of heavy braids. She passed Con with head held high, a slight smile on her lips. She took a seat in the farthest corner, extracted a partly finished piece of knitting from a small basket, and began to knit. For a while Con stood stiffly, his eyes fixed on the sky. Gradually, however, curiosity conquered pride. His gaze wandered to the far corner. There were only a few other passengers. He could watch her unobserved, for she was intent on her work. Whenever she paused, it was only to look out at the sunset sky or the dark waters of the lake. The garment she was knitting seemed to be a sweater, one of those gaily patterned sweaters that the lasses of the fishing towns back home used to make. It was dark blue, and the pattern ran across it in bands of bright color. There was one strip of gay flowers and green grass. Above it was a procession of farm animals, pigs and goats, geese, chicken, calves, horses. The topmost stripe was the broadest and most interesting of all. But it was only partly finished. There seemed to be a small white house in the center, flanked by 2 trees. Then there were 2 little figures, a man and a woman, one on either side of the house. They were completed only up to their necks, but he could see that the woman's costume was the same as Trudy's. Then came a pair of orange cows, a pair of spotted dogs, and a pair of black and white cats. All around were sprinkled bright little flowers. Her hands moved like lightning. The bone needles flickered in the sun. When the car neared the summit, she rose, went to the window, and stood gazing into the sunset. The thick ringed braids blazed like a golden crown, seemed to shed an aura of golden light about her head. "No, ma'am," Con answered in an inquiring passenger. "That's not the Palace of Fine Arts. That's the railroad station. The Fine Arts Palace is over there by the lagoon." "Yes, ma'am. That's the Midway right down there. Yes'm, it's entirely safe for a lady." By the time he had finished his explanations, Trudy was again seated and busy with her knitting. At the conclusion of the trip, she filed out with the other passengers as she had come in, head high, eyes straight ahead, the faintest trace of a smile. Each day she came at the same hour for the same trip. Always she sat in the same far corner seat and rose, bathed in golden light, to gaze into the sunset. Always she left as she came, with no sign of recognition, head high, and smiling her secret smile. The sweater progressed slowly. The girl was now completed. She had heavy braids of pale yellow hair, but the man, being taller, still lacked a head. All week Con simmered. In his heart, rage, shame, pride, and love battled unceasingly, now one uppermost, now the other. The combat left him shaken and bewildered. Each evening he resolved furiously that he would not bear with it another day. He would go to Mr. Ferris, first thing in the morning, and ask to be relieved. He would take the next train to St. Louis, and each morning found him at the door of car number 1, counting the hours till evening. Night times at Mrs. Murphy's, Martin Brennan wisely held his peace. Con's return usually found him asleep or pretending sleep. He offered no comment on Con's uneasy rest, his turnings and tossings and mutterings throughout the night. Somehow the long week of travail passed, and the last day of the wheel's operation arrived. All day Con alternately quivered with the thought of her arrival or sank into bottomless gloom with the fear that she might not come at all. The hour of the sunset trip came at last, and his depression deepened as the minutes sped by with no sign of her. The weather was quite cool now. Most of the attractions had closed, and there were few visitors. One pleasant-looking, middle-aged lady settled herself in car number 1. The other cars had a scattering of passengers. Their guards closed and locked the doors. But Con still waited. The door of number 1 opened wide. Suddenly she was there, her cheeks flushed pink with hurry and the brisk air. Hastily, looking neither to the right nor left, she entered and took her usual seat. Con slammed and locked the door with unnecessary violence. Trudy got out her sweater and began to knit. Her fellow passengers moved over and watched with wonder. "Goodness gracious," she exclaimed. "That is the most beautiful sweater I have ever beheld. The very most. But so intricate. Hasn't it taken just ages to do?" "A long time," Trudy answered, "since I have come to this country. Almost a year and a half yet. But I have not worked very hard. There was no hurry." "One couldn't hurry with anything as perfectly exquisite as that. I have never seen anything like it." Trudy laughed. It's the kind the girls make in the old country for their brothers and husbands. And sweethearts? Sometimes, yes, she admitted, but not this one. Nine, no. You seem very decided about that, the lady laughed. The little figures are simply fascinating. I don't see how you do it. Why, my dear, the little girl looks very much like you, she exclaimed it more closely. Yes, of course it is. The same costume, the same golden braids. But the poor man, he hasn't had any head yet. What color will his hair be? I have not decided. Trudy shrugged indifferently. Black, perhaps, or gray, perhaps yellow. I have a niece friend with blonde hair, like mine. Or I have a nice friend with blonde hair, like mine. Con got out a rag and began furiously polishing brasswork. Or red? The lady suggested. Wouldn't red be very effective? No, not red, Trudy exclaimed. People with red hair are cruel and cold and proud. Not red. Her companion laughed. Oh, no, my dear, you must be mistaken. Hot-tempered, yes, but not cold or cruel. Why, I know several people with red hair, and they... No, Trudy interrupted decisively. They are cruel and proud and stubborn. The brass polishing became more violent. Trudy laid down her work and stepped to the window, smiling at her new friend. Let's look at the beautiful sunset and not think about unhappy things. Silently, they watched the great red globe sink into the prairie. Fair weather tomorrow, the friend said. As the car slowly descended, it became darker. Con switched on the lights. Trudy resumed her knitting, working rapidly. The trip at last ended. Con flung open the north door with his usual exit speech. Goodbye, my dear, the lady said, rising to go. I hope you finish your beautiful sweater soon. It will make someone very happy. Trudy, counting stitches, could not reply, but nodded and smiled a cordial farewell. She continued to knit and count. Con repeated his speech with emphasis. All out, please. Those wishing another trip will kindly purchase tickets at the office. Twitching her head impatiently, Trudy indicated a ticket stuck in the back of the next seat. Con slammed and locked the east door, collected the ticket brusquely, and started to unlock the south door. He hesitated a moment, then put the key back in his pocket. One or two passengers approached, but seeing the door close, moved on to car number 2. Con continued his polishing, Trudy her knitting. As the car approached the summit, she finished her row and gazed around speculatively. I think, she mused half to herself, I think I would like the cooking stove in the corner best. No, perhaps a little away. Yes, that would be better. Then the wood box by the door. She picked up the sweater and continued her knitting. Holsteins are better for the cheese, Uncle Otto says, but I think I would like most a Jersey cow. I think. Almost a pet one would be so gentle. In her stable, it would be always warm, and on Christmas Eve at midnight, she would kneel down. Her soliloquy was shattered by an anger-choked voice. And how would you be knowing about a cook stove or the wood box of a Jersey cow? Con demanded furiously. His bulk towered over her, dark against the evening sky. Her eyes opened wide in seeming innocence. From your letters, she answered calmly. The letters that Martin Brennan gave me, the dear small man. He'd no right, Con raged. I threw them away. The little rat. No, you will not. She rose and faced him. You could not hurt a little man, a cripple. A girl, yes. A girl you could hurt, but not him. Not even you. Before her steady gaze, his eyes dropped. They came to rest on the sweater lying on the seat. Suddenly he felt the blood flooding his face, pounding in his throat and ears. He pointed an unsteady finger. The man, he choked. The little man, his hair. It's red. Yes, red, she said. I had no more yellow wool, or black or white, only red. It had to be red. It was his fortune. And the star over the small white house? That was his fortune, too. She had been gazing out at the cool sky, where now the evening star had appeared, twinkling brightly. Now she turned and picked up the sweater, holding it before her, almost as a shield. Would you mind if I measure it on you? My friend, he is almost the same size. She stretched it across his chest. She had to reach up to do it, to tilt back her head to see. Her fingers pressed it against his shoulders. Why, Con, you are trembling. Are you cold? Oh, Con, you are crushing your sweater. A bone needle fell to the carpet. Now, you've made me drop a stitch. Never mind. Con, dear. The car came gently to rest. There she is. Dimly, they became aware of laughter, whoops, and a derisive chant. A half-dozen guards were lined up, peering into the brilliantly lighted car. All out, please, they intoned. Those wishing another ride will kindly purchase tickets at the ticket booth. Hastily unlocking the north door, they fled, leaving the door standing wide and unlocked, the first and only time Con had ever broken the rules. It was almost midnight. Martin Brennan stood at the window looking across the fairgrounds, watching the great lighted wheel making its last revolution. It turned slowly, majestically. Its huge, glowing circle seemed to fill the sky, to make the great fair building seem tiny and insignificant. He became aware of a clatter of running feet on the stairs and of the door bursting open. "You thieving little rag-picker, you!" Con roared. Martin started to duck, then realized that the roar was joyous and that Con was pounding his back affectionately. "Whisht, lad," Martin said, pointing through the window. "I'm sitting up with a dying friend." Con fell silent, and they both watched as the giant wheel at last came to its final stop. Across the grounds there floated the thin, sweet keening of little Betsy's whistle. Some minutes it wailed, then reluctantly died away. As its last note ceased, the great circle of light suddenly disappeared, leaving nothing but blackness. Con rubbed his eyes and looked again. There was nothing. It was as though the wheel had never existed. "Martin," Con asked with a sheepish grin, "will you be the best man for me?" Martin, bursting with pleasure and embarrassment, colored and plucked at his nails. "Now, wouldn't it be an odd and contradictory sight," he said, "a little twisty thing, the like of me being called the best man, with that great giant of an Uncle Patrick of yours standing by?" "It will not," Con said. "Uncle Patrick may be the biggest, but he's not the best, and we'll be having nothing but the best, so make up your mind to it." Chapter 16. A few weeks later, Con came walking down the hill from the Zillheimer Model Creamery. If he was going to learn the cheese business, Uncle Otto said the place to begin was at the bottom, and the bottom was the cow barns and the creamery. Con liked it. He liked cows anyway. He liked the excessive cleanliness and order of the creamery. He liked the smell and the look of the huge vats of foaming milk and cream. And, being a smart young man, he was learning with that same rapidity that had so astonished Uncle Michael. Now he stopped at their own small barn to look in on their own small cow, a beautiful little Jersey that he had purchased from his own savings. Trudy, he could see, had already done the milking, so he tossed the cow a little more hay, slapped her flank, and continued on down the hill toward home. Home was a neat little farmhouse, much like the one that graced his new sweater. That sweater was so beautiful and so dear that it was only worn on extra special occasions. The house, the barn, and their surrounding acres had been Uncle Otto's wedding present. Con liked the location. The hill behind them shut off the view of the big barns, the distant creamery, and Uncle Otto's great sprawling stone house. Here, they were alone. Trudy came running to meet him, a heavy shawl flung over her shoulders, for the evening was crisply cold. His dog, a large, nondescript spotted hound, gamboled and bellowed a greeting. It was their favorite spot to meet, for here they could watch the sunset behind the hill, and a bit later Aunt Honora's star would appear directly over the house, just as it did on the sweater. This evening, as they waited, they suddenly became aware of a commotion on the roadway, and a moment later 2 teams of the great dappled Zillheimer horses swung in through the gate, hauling a long, low-swung dray. On the dray was perched a dark bulk of some sort. Con couldn't tell what. The driver clucked. The steaming teams strained and emerged into the open. "Glory be!" shouted Con. "It's car number 1. The reflected sunset set all the windows aflame and sparkled on the glittering brasswork. Con and Trudy, breathless with excitement, raced down the hill to meet it, to peer in the windows, to handle its shining doorknobs, to trace with eager fingers the polished brass figure 1 on the door. "Where would you want this put, Con?" the grinning driver asked. Con hadn't the faintest idea, but Trudy had already chosen the spot, a slight knoll not far from the house. So the horses once more leaned into their collars, and the lumbering load slowly moved to its final resting place. As the driver unhitched his horses, he paused and drew a small package from his pocket. "This here belongs with it," he said. "The freight agent gave it to me." The package contained a little box of polished wood lined with velvet. On the velvet lay the shining brass key to car number 1 and a card from Mr. and Mrs. Ferris wishing them many years of happiness. "The dear, kind people," Trudy said, slipping the key into the lock. She smiled teasingly at Con over her shoulder. Do you still want to move into it? She asked. Con laughed contentedly. I don't think so. Now, he said, I'm suited where I am, but I'm thinking it will make a grand playhouse for your George Washington, Ferris, Martin, Patrick, Kilroy.